I know we've heard it before, but now new confirmation that Iran could be a nuclear threat. In an unusually blunt and detailed report, the IAEA says Iran may be hiding key information about whether or not it's tried to make nuclear weapons and that it is refusing to cooperate with other countries. The report will be formally discussed by the UN Security Council next week. Meantime, Jimmy Carter, whose presidency was defined by the Iran hostage crisis, is spilling some secrets.
The United States has more than 12,000 nuclear weapons, and the Soviet Union has about the same. And as you know, Great Britain and France have several hundred, and Israel has 150 or more.
And with that statement, someone was saying TMI. The former president saying that Israel has 150 nuclear weapons in its arsenal. Widespread speculation about Israeli nukes has never been confirmed by the Jewish state or by America. Ambassador Mark Ginsburg is former deputy senior advisor to President Carter and joins us now. You know, the question is why? He clearly knows that this is something that is never discussed by America or by Israel. Why would he say it?
Edie, there's been a pattern of mischief on the part of President Carter in recent weeks, going back to his growing antagonism towards the state of Israel. There's no doubt that he knows exactly what he's doing when he's basically making these statements or making misrepresentations that Hamas has agreed to recognize Israel if certain conditions occur, or the text of the book that he wrote just a few years ago entitled Between Peace and Apartheid, referring to Israel. I mean, this goes back to essentially as a pattern of antagonism that seems to be growing towards the state of Israel, partly probably fueled by the amount of money that the Carter setting getting from Arab sources as well.
Now, Carter, of course, like every other president, had tried to work out peace in the Mideast. Do you think that there's a bit of sour grapes on his end there?
I think there's no doubt. I have talked to him when I was ambassador to Morocco, and there's no doubt, particularly given the vantage point that I had when I was in the White House back at the end of his administration, that he resents, in my judgment, because there's no other explanation that I can come up with, Edie, he resents the way in which Israel and the American Jewish community have failed to express sufficient gratitude for his efforts on behalf of peace in the Middle East. And I think that that resentment seems to just be growing and growing, where he drops these mischievous lines and engages in mischievous diplomacy that I believe are counterproductive to not only America's interest in the Middle East, but also ultimately to his own legacy.
Well, you call it mischievous. The Israelis called it irresponsible, but I would question if it was intentionally harmful to a U.S. ally.
Well, I'll go as far as agreeing with you. The idea that you drop the number of nuclear weapons that Israel may have at a time when it's been tradition within Israel to just treat the number of nuclear weapons from a position of what they call strategic ambiguity is not only irresponsible, but it also fuels the incentives on the part of countries like Iran to justify their own nuclear program by pointing specifically to Israel by saying, hey, all we want to do is have a nuclear program, and Israel, our major enemy in the region, has 150 nuclear weapons. Why is everyone so concerned about the threat that we pose to Israel as compared to the threat that Israel poses to us? That's the type of irresponsibility that you've talked about that I believe occurred here.
Now, as we mentioned, you were an advisor to President Carter during his presidency. I imagine that it probably doesn't feel real good to have your presidency usually defined by one moment, which isn't the best one. Of course, the American diplomat hostages being held 444 days in Tehran until President Reagan came on the scene. Do you think that now he's trying to do things or say things that might change the way history records him?
Well, perhaps, and indeed I was very proud when I worked for him on Camp David, and I thought that he was clearly committed to long-term efforts to forge peace in the Middle East, maybe perhaps ahead of his time. But these acts during the last few months, Edie, particularly undermine the legacy that I think he's tried to create. Indeed, just use this as an example. Why would he, in effect, try to engage with Hamas, a very sworn enemy of Israel, at a time when Hamas really doesn't even recognize Israel's right to exist? it seems to me to be counterproductive to the legacy that he wants to preserve, that is, a man of impartiality and a man of peace. The Israelis in Israel have enormous disdain and contempt now for his actions, and there's no doubt that why could he possibly play a role if he does not enjoy the impartiality of either side in terms of being able to play that honest broker? He's no longer an honest broker in the Middle East.
All right. Mark GINSBURG, former Deputy Senior Advisor to President Carter and Ambassador to Morocco. Thank you.
Thank you, Edie.
Baseball.